My name is Ndume Olatushani. I was falsely accused of murder, and I ultimately spent 28 years in prison, and 20 of those years was on death row in the state of Tennessee for a crime that I did not commit. While I was sitting on death row, among many things that I did, I became an accomplished artist. And I must say that art in many ways saved my life. I have no doubt that if it wasn't for art, that I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. I think that art certainly allowed for me to reach out to people. Actually, it was through my art that I was able to have people drawn a little closer, where they was able to learn about my circumstances. Prior to me sitting on death row in a 4x9 foot cell, I really had no interest in art. It was only through these adverse circumstances that I end up, art found me, and it did what it did for me. Well, 2 years into my imprisonment, it was a guy on death row with me who was an artist, and I had commissioned him to do this portrait of me because I wanted to send this portrait to my mother. Unfortunately, what happened is my mother was actually killed in a car accident, and I was already sitting where I was sitting. I couldn't be no lower than I actually was, but that laid me flat on the ground. And there was those horrible circumstances that art found me, and it was through my art that I began to just kind of pick myself up and begin to put one foot in front of the other one, and I was able to pick myself up. Before I was actually able to paint, I mean, we was certainly limited in the materials that we could have, the amount of supplies that we can actually have in ourselves at the time. I mean, for those of you guys that's familiar with a paintbrush, that you know how long a paintbrush actually is. It was, whenever we got these paintbrushes, they would actually cut them down to maybe 4 inches, 4 or 5 inches at best. And I would take old magazines and sometimes newspaper and just kind of wet it and roll it up really tight and onto the piece of stick that was still left on the paintbrush to kind of make it a little longer. But like I said, it was through my art that, I tell people, I guess in some ways I was an artist before I found myself on death row, but sitting there, when I first started, I couldn't draw a crooked line straight, but art, I think, is like a whole lot of other things that whenever we put time and effort into it, then we can certainly achieve things beyond what we think that we may be able to do. If you ever seen the inside of a jail or a prison, most of them, I mean, if they have any color on the wall, is some, dull off-white or gray, I mean, it's basically a colorless environment. Art not only allowed for me to create things that I wanted to see, but I think that because I think artists are certainly responsible in a lot of ways, because being an artist, whatever that art form actually takes, we're able to challenge people's reality in ways that may not necessarily go over well if I was actually trying to talk to a person, face to face. I mean, with art, however that art kind of, whatever form it is, I mean, you do what you do and people, see it for what it is, or they see, however they see it. But for me, I certainly wanted my art, anything that I did, I wanted it to be something that kind of challenged, people's reality about some of the social and economic injustices, all these different things that kind of that we're dealing with in society. That I wanted my art to kind of challenge people in this way, and so. And like I said, if you see any of my art, that most of my art certainly is really colorful, because for me, like I said, being in this colorless environment and trying to deal with the reality of sitting on death row, facing the prospect of death for something that I didn't do, I art certainly gave me this avenue to, to just kind of be in a different space when I needed to be to maintain my sanity. And certainly, like I said, having the opportunity to be creative in the way that I actually was, art became this form of resistance for me as well too, because like I said, being in this colorless environment, the thing that they couldn't do was stop the color that was actually happening in my head. So, I always used a lot of colors and bright colors because, like I said, even though that I was being denied the things that I was being denied while I was sitting on death row, the one thing that I certainly knew that I always had control over was my mind. That was the thing that I refused to let those circumstances take from me. What I may or may not do was not going to be contingent on what was happening around me. Even though that I was physically confined, I didn't want that confinement to define who I actually was. And so, and art certainly allowed for me to, create the things that I do. I've used art in many different ways. While I was in prison and even since I've been home. I came home June 1st of 2012. And when I came home, I didn't use my art around the country and certainly in a couple of places outside this country to engage with young people, try to get them to see some of these systems that's operating around us, that particularly here in the United States. Locking people up here in the United States is a huge industry. And so I used my art while I was inside to just kind of challenge people to think about these things, and I certainly have done it since I've been home. And I feel honored to have this opportunity to come to you guys and say that, like I said, I was an artist before I found myself sitting on death row. And had I had the opportunity to explore that creative side that we all possess, I'm sure that I could have had every opportunity, to create and produce some of the stuff that I do now, and possibly even more, because certainly my art while I was in prison, and I guess in some ways it's still true today, and that is that my art has and always kind of been determined by, what's happening around me. And so I would encourage you guys, to reach out and support not only artists on the streets, but also to particularly those in prison, because we have some of our best and brightest are sitting in prison and jail cells across this country, and certainly some of our bravest. So thank you for this opportunity to come to you, and I hope you go out and get in a good fight and help an artist be inspired to do whatever it is that they led to do.